My name is Anggita Andrea, and I will be acting as the Master of Ceremony of today's event. Before we start our event, I would like to remind all the participants to rename your Zoom account as name_institution, and please keep your mic off during the event. However, you are expected to turn on your camera in order to respect the speakers. Next, I want to welcome and express my gratitude to the Board of Executives, Nino Navan as the President, Ahmad Reza Maulana as the Vice President of Human Resources and Substances, and Errol Averilia as the Vice President on Public Relations and Affairs of FPCI Chapter OE Board of 2020, as well as the speakers, moderator, and the participants of FPCI Chapter Summit 2020 Policy Dialogue. Affirmative action, is it an effective instrument to achieve racial equality? In today's event, we are pleased to have Her Excellency Yun Wahyu Ningrum, Representative of Indonesia to ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, Yun Opusunggu PhD, Permanent Lecturer at the Faculty of Law, Universitas Indonesia, and Dr. Hook Aung Lee, Senior Fellow at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute, as the speakers of today's webinar, who will be delivering many insights about affirmative actions in multicultural societies such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. We are also pleased to have Ms. Dominique Feargill from Amnesty International Indonesia to moderate our event today. Today's event is part of the FPCI Chapter Summit 2020, an event carried out by the Research and Analysis Division of the FPCI Chapter OE Board of 2020. This event consists of a series of events held in 3 weeks, starting with the holding of an online seminar to introduce the topic to be brought up, namely the effectiveness of affirmative action in achieving equality for each ethnic group made by governments in various countries. The highlight of this event is a conference filled with discussions between FPCI chapters in universities across Indonesia to discuss the topics raised in depth, which will later produce a policy paper which will be a recommendation for the government of Indonesia. At the end of the session, there will be a nomination for Best Participant. So please don't hesitate to raise your question and be actively involved in the discussion. Before we start the main session, let me explain today's rundown. Firstly, opening by the MC. Secondly, remarks from the Project Officer and Board of Executives of FPCI Chapter E Board of 2020. Thirdly, profile introduction of the moderator. Profile introduction of the speakers from the moderator. Presentation of the topics by Her Excellency Yun Wahyu Ningrum. Presentation of the topics by Yun Opusunggu PhD. Presentation of the topics by Dr. Hook Aung Lee. Question and answer session. Concluding remarks from the moderator. Best participant announcement and photo session. And lastly, closing by the MC. Without further ado, please welcome Joseph Cristanto as the project officer of this event, who will be delivering his opening remarks. For Joseph, the time is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope we are all in our best condition, both physically and mentally. On this beautiful day, I would like to welcome all of you to FPCI Chapter Summit 2020 Policy Dialogue. Affirmative action, is it an effective instrument to achieve racial equality? I would also like to welcome our speakers, Her Excellency Yun Wahyu Ningrum, Mr. Yun Opusunggu, and Dr. Hook Aung Lee. Thank you for the willingness to share your knowledge and expertise concerning our topic today. I would also like to thank Ms. Dominique, who will moderate our discussion today. I would like to thank Bang Nino, Bang Reza, and Kak Eril as the Board of Executive of FPCI Chapter UI Board of 2020, as well as Kak Pandey, Katia, and Kak Jojo as the BPH of Research and Analysis Division for their guidance so that this event can take place this afternoon. The term affirmative action has been a matter of debate whether it is morally or legally justifiable in a stratified or differentiated society. Affirmative action is a series of policies used in order to achieve justice and equal treatment for each group. However, affirmative action can also be defined as a policy to promote certain groups, which often leads to favoritism. The idea of affirmative action itself emerged after it was realized that in a multicultural society, it's necessary to grant special rights to a certain group in order to maintain equality between each and every group in a society. This policy is particularly famous in countries such as Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, where society is not just stratified economically, but also differentiated among race, ethnicity, custom, religion, which further complicates the issue. Through this policy dialogue, I hope participants will be able to grasp the importance of this underreported issue, and I also hope that this event can raise our awareness about issues like this in order to have a better understanding of the challenges faced by our nation in creating a condition that is conducive and accommodating to every citizen without exception. To end this opening remark, I hope we can all enjoy this event and gain knowledge as much as we could. Thank you. FPCI Chapter UI Board of 2020 Innovate Beyond Limits.
Thank you, Joseph, for the opening remarks. Next, we are inviting Reza Maulana as the Board of Executives of FPCI Chapter E Board of 2020, who will be delivering his opening remarks. For Reza, the time is yours.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the pre-event of FPCI Chapter UI Summit, which is the policy dialogue. My name is Reza Maulana. On behalf of the Board of Executives, acting as the Vice President on Human Resource and Substance, I would like to convene my gratitude to the speakers, Bu Yuyun, Pa Yuun, and Dr. Huok Oli, to attend this conference and this webinar. Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia is a non-profit, non-political, and independent organization started by Pak Dino Patijalal, former Indonesia ambassador to the United States and former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs during Pak SBY era. Up until this day, FPCI operates in the international relations subject. Started in 2014, FPCI has grown into one of the biggest academic organizations in Indonesia. We're consisting of 40,000 members from various universities all across Indonesia with multiple partners around the world, naming from diplomats, government officials, researchers, public figures, and students. On the other hand, FPCI Chapter Universitas Indonesia is one of the student branches of FPCI, which based in Universitas Indonesia. We currently have the status of Unit Kegiatan Mahasiswa in Universitas Indonesia. FPCI Chapter UI was established in 2015 in order to be a platform for students with a keen interest in foreign policy. We expect the motto of Innovate Beyond Limits, in which we expect the members to innovate beyond their limits in this pandemic terms. It is my pleasure and it is also our gratitude to welcome all of you, because FPCI Chapters UI Policy Dialogue is one of the pre-event of the main event, which is FPCI Chapter UI Summit. This summit will be held next 2 weeks, in which we're gonna invite more than 10 universities all across the world, all across Indonesia, in order to provide a policy dialogue and conducting a deliberation concerning the issues of affirmative action. At the end, FPCI Chapter Summit will provide a policy paper that's going to be a recommendation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as to the government of Indonesia in tackling down these issues. FPCI Chapter, we understand that this issue might be sensitive to certain people, and these issues might be one of the means to reach equality within Indonesia or the Southeast Asia. Therefore, we expect the participants to be active, since the speakers here are the representative of each stakeholders that available in these issues. We have Pak Yuun, who's also the lecturer of conflict of law in Universitas Indonesia. We have Bu Yuyun, who's also the ASEAN representative of Indonesia. And we also have Dr. Lee Huok, who also the researcher in the RSIS Singapore. Therefore, we ensure you that this conference will enlighten your mind by giving you a quality discussion and fruitful insight. My name is Reza Maulana. On behalf of FPCI Chapter UI, we welcome you once again and hope that you gain insight from this webinar. FPCI Chapter UI, Board of 2020, Innovate Beyond Limits. Thank you. Back to the MC.
Thank you, Reza, for the opening remarks. Next, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's event. Our discussion today will be moderated by Dominique Feargill. Ms. Dominique is currently a researcher at Amnesty International Indonesia. She is a graduate from Faculty of Law, University of Indonesia, majoring in Public International Law. Her interests include business and human rights, refugee and migration law, and the law of the sea, stemmed from her involvement in Model United Nations, moot court competitions, and paper conferences. She was the Diplomatic Commendation Awardee in Legal Comedy of Harvard National NUM 2018 in Boston, USA, and the 8th Best Oralist of the Netherlands Institute for the Law of the Sea, moot court competition in Utrecht, Netherlands. Without further ado, please welcome Ms. Dominique Feargill.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Good afternoon to the speakers, to the committee members from FPCI Chapter University of Indonesia, and all of the participants. And welcome to the FPCI's Chapter Summit 2020 Policy Dialogue, Affirmative Action. Is it an effective instrument to achieve racial equality? My name is Dominique Feargill, and I will be the moderator for the session. Being one of the countries known with its multicultural societies, Indonesia, as well as Singapore and Malaysia, have been debating about whether affirmative actions will be effective in achieving the racial equality itself. And it has been an ongoing debate among us. However, we should ask ourselves, how have we really known how it should be better implemented? So on this spectacular moment, we are about to meet three notable speakers with prestigious and remarkable experience and background, which will cover the topic of affirmative actions as an effort to build a country that is able to accommodate various ethnicities, nations, and religions. Nations around the world aim to create conducive and accommodating conditions for every citizen. Before we begin the sessions from the speakers and before we move on to the presentations from each speaker, I will introduce the three speakers that will be speaking in the session. The first speaker will be Her Excellency Yuyun Wahyuningrum as the representative of the Republic of Indonesia to ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, or ICHR. Her Excellency Yuyun has obtained her Master of Arts degree in Human Rights from Mahidol University, Thailand in 2007. And also she is currently taking her Doctor of Philosophy in International Institute of Social Studies in Erasmus University, Rotterdam. And as mentioned, she is currently the representative of Indonesia to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights from 2019 to 2021. And she was the team leader of Regional EU-ASEAN Dialogue Instrument on Human Rights Facility to support human rights work of the ICHR, the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and the Protection of the Rights of Women and Children, and the ASEAN Committee on Migrant Workers, as well as the ASEAN Committee on Women. And lastly, she has been having 22 years of working experience in human rights organizations at the national, regional, and international level, including Human Rights Working Group, or HRWG Jakarta, Forum Asia in Bangkok, Oxfam, Child Workers in Asia, the Solidarity Center, and the National Commission on Child Protection. The second speaker will be Mr. Yuun Opusunggu, PhD, as the permanent lecturer at the Faculty of Law, University of Indonesia. Dr. Yuun Opusunggu has obtained his Doctor of Philosophy degree from Washington University, Seattle, and he also obtained his Master of Law, or LLM, from Leiden University. His experiences include, first of all, being the permanent lecturer on the conflict of laws as his main course at the Faculty of Law in Universitas Indonesia. And he was also the rapporteur at the ASEAN Asian Business Law Institute in Singapore in 2017, the member of the Commission on Asian Principles of Private International Law in Kyoto in 2015, visiting scholar at the Asian Law Institute, and he has also been involved in a number of academic studies and advices in various ministries and state agencies. And as seen in the screen, he has also achieved several awards, the first one being the winner of the EDOM Best Lecturer Award, most recently in 2020, as well as the winner of the EDOM Most Prolific FOE Lecturer in Publications in 2017. And last but not least, our third speaker will be Dr. Huok Aun Lee as the Senior Fellow at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute. Dr. Lee obtained his Doctor and Philosophy degree in Economics from the University of Massachusetts, and also Master of Science in Political Economy of Development in SOAS University of London. His experiences include currently being the Senior Fellow at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, and he was also the National Consultant in the inaugural UNDP Malaysia Human Development Report in 2013. He has also published some articles as well as papers, and his articles have been published in ISEAS Perspective and ISEAS Trends in Southeast Asia series, as well as research and published works regarding affirmative action, discrimination, inequality, social protection, labor and education with focus on Malaysia, as well as comparative study vis-a-vis South Africa and Southeast Asia. And he will also be publishing another publication in 2021 on affirmative action in Malaysia and South Africa, preference for parity. Without further ado, let's welcome Her Excellency Yuyun Wahyuningrum to present her materials. Her Excellency, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dominic. Thank you very much for the organizers for having me. And respected speakers, happy to see you on the screen. And dear participants, I prepared my presentation, so I will just share my screen now. So it's a host disable participant screen sharing. So maybe have to be allowed to share.
Could you try again, please? I've made it co-host.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for picking up this this topic, because I don't know if it is really becoming an issue today, but it was when I was still a little bit younger in 90s, when we talk about the quota for women in the parliament and also quota for those who are coming from the eastern part of Indonesia. So if this come again and questioned whether it is effective, maybe this is the time. It's already our reform process already taken around 20-25 years. So all right, so I was asked to talk about the human rights perspective in looking at the affirmative action. I would like to start from the concept. The concept notes already mentioned about it, but I would like to take a little bit time to also mention about this. As the MC earlier mentioned, it is affirmative action is policies and also practice, not only by government, but also organizations. My previous organization also impose affirmative action, especially for women, especially for those coming from eastern part of Indonesia to come and have work with our organization. And these policies and practices is to based on their gender, ethnicity, religion, race, creed, or nationality, or any other reason that have historically excluded from the public spheres, political representation, or education or employment. The purpose is to promote the opportunity of defined minority groups within the society to give them equal access to that of the majority population. Beneficiaries usually disadvantaged group socio-economically and at certain point politically, but hardly mention about political disadvantaged people become the target of affirmative action, but it is not limited to only for social economic disadvantaged people. So for instance, due to patriarchal paradigm, historical reasons such as oppression and slavery, or political motivation, certain groups were marginalized intentionally because of their belief or their political belief or something similar like that. The affirmative action is characterized by temporary, so it means if the equal access of equal opportunity has been achieved, then the affirmative action policies or practices can be closed. It's also characterized as special measure, so there are a number of measures, but this is special. And some groups use the word preferential treatment for certain groups that usually disadvantage among the society. The forms can be varied, like public participation, access to resources, scholarship, quota, access to education, employment, and so on and so on. So from the perspective of human rights, I would like to start from the norms that human rights usually base, which is the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The UDHR does not mention about affirmative action as a word, but UDHR provide the reason why affirmative action can be done. So for instance, that UDHR endorse the principle of human equality. UDHR also mentioned about the right to work, adequate standard of living, right to education, and so on and so on. Second convention that provide the reason why affirmative action is allowed is International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. I would like to start with the Article 2.2, which mention about the special and concrete measures that state can impose, can introduce. Then the Article 1.4, I will not read the whole text because you can have this PowerPoint presentation later on. The Article 1.4 clarify that special measures for the purpose of equalizing the opportunity for different ethnic and races should not be considered as racial discrimination. So this is the support from the ICERT, International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. Another convention that actually support the affirmative action is the 1979 Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW. Article 4 talk about special measures of a temporary nature. Similarly, CEDAW support that women, especially coming from the disadvantaged group, can have preferential treatment. So state is allowed to come up with such a program or policies. Another document that I would like to use here is also ICCPR, the International Convention on Civil Political Rights. The committee, the body that monitor the implementation of ICCPR, which is called Human Rights Committee, also mentioned about affirmative action in order to diminish or eliminate condition which cause or help to perpetuate discrimination prohibited by the convention. So I give the example here, but in the interest of the time, I will not read the example. So, from the perspective of human rights, affirmative action usually use the argument of equality principles, that not only government or state permit to impose or to have the affirmative action, but at some point, government or state required to do so. So there is so permit means it's up to the government. Require means there is an emphasis that government should do something when the situation allow them to do so, or based on their analysis, there is a need to come up with the affirmative action. So human rights law facilitate the adoption of affirmative action program in respect of disadvantaged group. But in order to establish this kind of argument on the need of affirmative action, there are a number of conditions to be satisfied. The first one is that the targeted group there is an evidence that this group has historically suffered from discrimination. Second, there is a need to have an evidence that the present-day consequences of past discrimination impede the enjoyment of current human rights. And then the third, the measures that proposed by the affirmative action will be able to address the consequences of the past discrimination. And fourth, this is not a requirement, but rather a call by the committee for government to provide periodic reports. So what should be reported under this kind of program or policies called affirmative action? Committee of CERT, the committee that monitor the implementation of the convention on CERT, said that governments who ratify the convention and would like to conduct or would like to introduce affirmative action should come up with the periodic report, which consists of the following matters. The first one is terminology use, because affirmative action can be translated into different languages and different terminology. So the committee asks the country to clarify what kind of terminology, what the meaning of it, and what is the justification of the affirmative action, and description, how disparities can be addressed, and what kind of expected result from this kind of affirmative action and policies. Who are the beneficiaries of this action? Whether there was or there has been consultations with the groups and wider stakeholders in relation to decision to come up with the affirmative action, and the nature of measures and how these measures as affirmative action can promote progress among these the individual or groups, and the area of action or sectors, either in politics or in different situation, and also the institution to monitor or responsible to apply the measures. What kind of mechanism to follow up and evaluate the affirmative action? Is there any involvement of beneficiaries in the process of evaluation and assessment? To what extent the affirmative action has been effective or not? And then there should be, the report should include the professional result as based on the implementation of affirmative action. If the plan, so if the state plan for 10 kind of activities in terms of as an interpretation of the affirmative policies, and some of them are not implemented, then government or state need to provide a reason why these are not implemented. So at least this is the minimum information that the committee would like to hear from state parties, the countries or state that ratify the convention of CERT. So let's look at the ratification of the ASEAN, of the CERT especially. I mentioned about CERT, ICCPR, and CEDAW in my previous presentation in relation to affirmative action. So if we can look at the CERT, Brunei, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Singapore are not a state party to this convention. Malaysia almost ratified the convention during the earlier days of reform, 2018 or 2019, but failed to push the agenda of ratifying this convention. CEDAW has been ratified by all 10 countries: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And the other one is ICCPR. Brunei, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Singapore are not state party to ICCPR. So we can see if in Southeast Asia, if we want to push for affirmative action, if society believes that affirmative action is something positive to improve the equal opportunity for everyone, for all, then perhaps CEDAW can be used to push this kind of policies. But the limitation is that CEDAW very focused on women. So affirmative action may look at the groups of women, the indigenous people of the women, or any kind of categories of women's groups. That's on if there is a need to do affirmative action in ASEAN. Yeah. Okay, practices in Southeast Asia. I believe there are practices beyond Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. I also saw a number of practices in Thailand. So for instance, Thailand now open more for women, Muslim women to sit in the government offices, and also as a government officers, as diplomats, as ambassadors. So now the spaces are actually bigger and bigger compared from before. but I'm not sure whether it is written in policies, but I saw number of policies. Similarly with Cambodia, Cambodia now I saw more and more women with hijab sitting in ASEAN meetings. So it means they are either diplomats or they are function as governments, but dealing with international affairs. So I see number of openness for number of countries to allow these possibilities. Indonesia has affirmative action policies. I mentioned earlier in terms of the participation of women, like quota 30% in the parliament, also in political party, and then also now President Jokowi having a presidential decree, if I'm not mistaken, for person with disabilities in workplace, and also he show this kind of initiative by recruiting number of person with disabilities as his special staff, and come up with number of so now we see there are 4 presidential decree for person with disabilities as an interpretation of the law in relation to the right of person with disabilities within 7 months after the recruitment. So it has, so this kind of affirmative action actually give a lot of additional values, not only for the person with disabilities, but also for the government. And when I was younger, when I look for scholarship, there always be the explanation that women, especially coming from the eastern part of Indonesia, are encouraged to apply for scholarship. So it means actually there are quotas for women and also for those who coming from the eastern part of Indonesia to access education, to employment, to scholarship, to access number of opportunities for learning, short course and any other kind of opportunities. Government, I think, government of Indonesia has the specific policies to include Papuans to education, and also government positions, and police, army, as a member of army, military, and so on and so on. And we can see also more and more Papuan sitting as the minister in each presidency. In Malaysia, I guess someone will be talking about Malaysia, but so I'm not going to go into deeper into Malaysia, but affirmative action is guaranteed in the constitution, but unfortunately it gives special position to the Malay community. So my Chinese Malaysian friends, usually when they look for scholarship, they did not look for government scholarship, but rather international scholarship like Ford Foundation, Chevening Award, and others. So so even many of my Chinese friends, Malaysian Chinese friends, said that not even they try the government scholarship because they know already they are not going to get it. But now more and more I saw Chinese and Indian or Malaysian Indian and Malaysian Chinese, Malaysian Chinese sitting in the diplomats positions. Again, the constitution, I think, still the same, but action has been expanded to have more and more non-Malays sitting in important positions. Of course, because I work in ASEAN, so this is what I see. So I'm not sure how what happened at the national level. So as one of the speakers earlier mentioned, that affirmative action has a lot of arguments. Some of them are against, some of them are for. Those who against affirmative action said that this kind of policies and practices is actually violating the right to equality, hinders reconciliation, suggests more inferiority for those who are marginalized and disabled, and also actually increase racial tension among the same race or different races. And those who support the idea of affirmative action argue that this kind of policies and practices actually guarantee the effective equality of among people, different, no matter their background. So for the certain groups that have been historically marginalized, they will be able to increase or improve their quality of life. And those who are supportive to this idea believe that affirmative action can ensure the voices of minorities included in the public life and public policies. It's also strengthen the group's social image and foster fairness. Without affirmative action, we will not be able to be fair. We will not be able to reach equal access, equal opportunity, the equality itself. So these are two opinions that we continue to hear from time to time. I think that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Ibu Yuyun, for a wonderful presentation. For the participants, I'm passing the message from the committee first to change your name followed by institution according to the instruction in the chat box later. That will be sent by the committee. So just to wrap up from the presentation of Ibu Yuyun, she has explained about the concept of affirmative action, which is to promote the opportunities of defined minority groups within a society to give them equal access to that of the majority population, and that the affirmative action's beneficiaries are mostly socio-economically disadvantaged groups based on historical standards as well. And there have been also some forms that have been explained by Ibu Yuyun, and also the human rights standards, human rights law, the basis of the affirmative actions itself, like UDHR, ICERD, CEDAW, ICCPR, and the complementing general recommendation of the Human Rights Committee, and that affirmative action will also achieve the equality principle. Ibu Yuyun also explained about the conditions for affirmative actions. There are 4 criteria. The first one, that certain groups need to have historically suffered from discrimination. Second, there should be evidence of the present day consequences of past discrimination. The third one, it must be shown by states that the measures will address those discrimination, and that the affirmative action itself should be periodically reported. And Ibu Yuyun has also explained about the ratification status of human rights instruments by ASEAN member states and how it imposes certain requirements or duty for states, including the practice in Malaysia and Indonesia. And what I will highlight from Ibu Yuyun's presentation is that based on the human rights law, states will be the main duty bearers for affirmative actions itself. So thank you so much, Ibu Yuyun. We learned so much from your presentation. And I will also proceed to the second speaker, Mr. Yuun Opusunggu. You may have the floor.
Thank you, Dominique. Good afternoon, everyone, and especially to my fellow speakers. Allow me to share my screen first. Okay, I'm a lawyer, so my background is law. And if the question is whether Indonesia needs affirmative action or not, the answer is no, because the law already given every single possibility to make sure that everyone will have equal opportunity according to the Constitution. Her Excellency Yuyun Wahyuningrum already showed to everyone that we have ratified a lot of international conventions, And from human rights perspective, even though I am not an expert, our constitution have been very well equipped. So Indonesian, compared to our neighbors in ASEAN, have almost full set of human rights. However, let's see whether we do really need a policy for policy's sake. So, not being a human rights expert, I would like to give you an overview about the discussion. Does Indonesia have a multi-ethnic problem? We need to be honest with who we are and what are the challenges of our nationhood. And then the second, for the sake of the discussion, do we need affirmative actions? And then the third one, what will be the social trajectories given the current condition? What has been regulated by our constitutions and our law, and as well as what is the real politics in the grassroots? What will become the social trajectory? And because you are the future, then I think it is necessary to give you an idea, to poke you with interest on what you can do to make a difference as agent of change. Now let's have a snapshot. This is basically what Indonesia, according to 2010 census, we have the Japanese as the majority. You may treat Japanese as a separate ethnic, but ethnicity, it depends on whether you're talking from anthropological perspective, from perspective of nationhood, or from any other perspective. So yes, it can be a separate ethnic. It cannot be a separate ethnic. It depends on how you see it. Uh, I think by this time we have around 270 million population. 86% more or less are Muslim, and we have minorities of Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, folk, and uh, this is not going to be admitted by the states, atheists and agnosticism. So that's the population background of Indonesia. And how diverse is Indonesia? How are you going to apply a certain rules if you are having this kind of people with their own traditions, uh, given from the way they dress? And then these are Indonesians. We have Indonesians who are pretty much embrace traditional way of dressing, embrace a very specific, according to their mazhab, their school of thought in Islam, and those who may consider as moderate, or they who simply dress according to the events. So the challenge for Indonesia, from my perspective, is not affirmative action in light of human rights, but how are you going to give people their constitutional rights? Here, I would like to emphasize that human rights have been adopted by the Constitution, in the Constitution. Therefore, when we talk about constitution, human rights, it should be constitutional rights in almost every aspects. Now, but we do have a problem. As countries that have been colonized by Western powers, uh, the Western administrative government would like to handle the whole population and the whole colony. And the Dutch made initially distinction between European and natives. Europeans synonym with Caucasians, and the rest Chinese, Arab, Indians, Japanese, and the rest of the people that would later on be considered as native will be classified as in native group. And then later on, for economic purposes, the colonial government said, nah, it's too risky to directly deal with the native population. Why don't we use the Chinese as a mediator? So in case something bad happened, the Chinese will be the one who should handle it first. So it's a self-containment kind of policy. This is the one that we inherited until today. Whenever we talk about racial issues, it's a colonial legacy. Now, however, from different perspective, uh, it would be inevitable to do so because it's so different and will be so difficult to apply certain rules that will be applicable throughout the archipelago. How are you going to implement a certain stipulation, the same kind of rights to people who live in Aceh as well as, or the same like people who live in Papua. They have different kind of tradition, they have different kind of worldview. So the initial challenge was worldview. Later on, when Indonesia gained her independence, the worldview represented by Pancasila is something that needs to be shared. But as you all well aware by now, it's in crisis. So the challenge would be, how are you going to administer the whole population? Well, the colonial government says, well, we put them into different classification, different groups, and we implement or we subject them to different kind of law. European will be subject to Dutch law, foreign Orientals, and then later on it would be divided into Chinese and non-Chinese, will be subject mostly to the same kind of law like the European, and the native will be subject to their own adat law or customary law. So this is the legacy, and it will be continued until today. It was the Indisestasregeling that can be treated as quasi-constitution for the Dutch East Indies. Quasi-constitution because the whole archipelago was part of the greater kingdoms of the Netherlands. It is a colony. So for the archipelago, the highest law will be IS. That can be translated as administrative law of state organization. So that kind of structure would be abolished by the time Indonesia gained independence, because you cannot tolerate having a pyramidal structure where at the top of the pyramid sits conveniently the ruler. No, because the constitution says either you are foreigners or you are Indonesian citizens. If you are Indonesian citizens, then you have equal rights and obligations, and therefore we don't have that kind of pyramid anymore, so to speak, supposedly. So, however, the law applicable for each group would be continued until today. So if it was previously considered as population group, after Indonesian independence, I argue it is a law group that I may be subject to different kind of law with all of you. However, as citizens, as nationals, we have the same rights and obligations. So it's what we call law group. Now, what is the basis for this? Article 37, paragraph 1 of the Constitution simply says, all citizens shall be equal before the law and the government, and shall be required to respect the law and the government with no exceptions. When the Constitution have adopted a lot of stipulations on human rights, all of you, without any exception, shall be equal before the law and the government. So if the government make some kind of affirmative action, quote unquote, to give more right to education for our fellow citizens from eastern part of Indonesia, it should be considered as giving them their constitutional rights. Would it be considered as human rights? Probably, but we don't need to discuss about human rights because it's already in the Constitution. You have the right to education. If the government fails to educate the nation, then something is wrong, because the point of independence is to educate the population. That's what been stated in the preamble to the Constitution. Now, let's just have one moment to stop. This is the size of Indonesia. Huge country, huge country. So we do have a problem. We do have a problem of multi-ethnicity. We do have a problem that some areas are lag behind, some areas are very well off, very advanced. However, if you are in the position of the government, you need to deal with every single person and to give them their rights without any exception. Now, the other problem for us will be nationhood. We are a very young nation. You can say Malay, Japanese, Sundanese, Bataknese, Chinese, etc. Anthropologically speaking, they have been around for ages, from time immemorial. However, Indonesia as a nation is just very young. You can go only as far as 1928 when we have the youth pledge. But legally speaking, we only became a nation in 1945. So we're only 75 years old as a nation. So it's very fragile, and we still learn how to become one, how to treat the one who sits next to me not as a Japanese or Sundanese or Chinese, but as a fellow citizen. That is the most important challenge that every single Indonesian needs to address. So you are all young people, and your seniors from the Recht School that would later on become Faculty of Law Universitas Indonesia were the one who became the mastermind of this youth congress of the Pemuda, Sumpah Pemuda. So Amir Sharifuddin, law students from the law faculty, uh, Limina from the Faculty of Medicine, Muhammad Yamin from the Law Faculty, Sudiman Kotari Brojo. At that time, he was a student in the law, in the medical faculty, but later on he switched to law faculty, and then Sugondo Joyopuspito from the law faculty. So they somehow have a vision. It's not possible to kick out the colonizer. We need to have a set that will bind us as human being, and that will be nationhood. And that is the most important part because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see any other country, especially in ASEAN, who have this kind of movement. Very interesting. A lot of people from different ethnicity, if you consider Batak, Ambonese, Padangese, Japanese as ethnic, then we have a multi-ethnicity that will later on make Indonesia as a nation. Why? Because they simply read this. They read Ernest Renan, What Makes a Nation? It's not going to be blood relation anymore. It's so outdated. It's your vision about the future, and the future will be shared with equal rights and obligations. That's what make interesting. That's what makes the 20th century interesting because there's a lot of revolutionary ideas. However, later on after the Cold War, it's no longer that revolutionary. We'll talk about that if you want. Now, there are special stipulations of rights where this is not about ethnicity, this is not about race. Well, you can see this is a discrimination. Will it be a violation of human rights? Probably. But if it is written in the law, then it may not be that violated of not the violation of human rights. So what about land rights in Yogyakarta? Chinese cannot have land title in Yogyakarta. Is it against the constitution? Prima facie, yes. However, we have to take into consideration what was the history for that. What about Islamic law applicable to all Muslims in Aceh? That once you are stepping your shoes on Aceh, whether if you are a Muslim, regardless of your nationality, you will be subject to a set of Islamic law according to the Qanun in Aceh. Would that be a violation of human rights? Probably. Probably you're not okay with that, but that's what the law says. And it is still within the framework of the Republic of Indonesia. And then we go into a very specific case about inheritance. According to compilation of Islamic law, you need to share the same faith, that will be Islam, with the deceased to share or to inherit whatever assets he or she left behind. If you are a non-Muslim, then according to this compilation of Islamic law, you are not entitled for inheritance. Is it against human rights? Well, probably yes, probably not. We can. You need to look at both sides of the coins. Now, let me answer this with questions. Does Indonesia have multi-ethnic problem? The answer is yes. But it can also be no. Why? Well, we never honest about what happened in 1998 or in 1965 or years before it. We like to bury it. Well, let someone else handle with it. So if you want to have an affirmative action, first of all, you need to have good intention, goodwill. You need to be honest. What happened? Well, there's a lot of political motivation that drove these riots, but the state, the country, the republic, the government never apologized to the victims. Should the state apologize? I think so, if you want to move forward. and a lot of corruption, collusion, nepotism at that time. That's so easy to distract any effort to settle with honesty. Do we need a commission like in South Africa, Truth and Reconciliation Committee? There was a discussion about that, but I am not aware there's a follow-up to that. There's a lot of looting, burning of buildings. Nobody claimed responsibility. Was the state failed to take responsibility? Obviously. And then what about the Chinese Indonesian victims of the violence? A lot of people would like to just, forget about it. Let's just move on. So yes, there's an issue. Is there any other issue? Yes. So back in 2016, this member of the House of Representatives said that, well, let's put back the phrase, the president should be indigenous Indonesian. That is nonsensical. Why? Because Indonesia was only founded in 1945. Prior to that, there's no such term as Indonesia Asli. Javanese was not Indonesian Asli. You are going to be indigenous Indonesian according to the nationality law that says when you are at your birth receive Indonesian nationality and you never receive any other foreign nationality based on your willingness, then you are indigenous Indonesian. So that shows that we do have a problem about multi-ethnicity. Because if I am a nationalist, regardless whatever faith I adhere to, I should be entitled to become the president of the Republic of Indonesia. Who are you to say no? Even the Constitution says yes. But yeah, that's what happened. And then does Indonesia need affirmative action? I repeat, no. Because we have already ratified or exceed a full set of human rights instruments according to the Indonesian law. We already accommodate it in our constitution, almost a full set of human rights during the Second Amendment in the year 2000. But yes, we may need affirmative action. Because at least we have this law number 40 of 2008, abolishment of race and ethnic discrimination. So you should not discriminate anyone because the person adhere to different faith, because the person comes from a certain economic background or group. No. And if you do that, you are subject to maximum 1 year imprisonment and or penalty in the amount of 100 million rupiah. So it's all there. If we treat this legal instrument as facility, as weapon, the question is, are we going to use it or not? Or do we only need this all stipulation just for a legal makeup? It needs to be available for the sake of availability only. So look what happened. This is just one case. I think the congregation of Yasmin Church in Bogor, West Java, regardless of whatever been discussed in the media, they are entitled to right to worship. The Constitution guaranteed everyone to have the right to worship. Did the state do anything to mitigate this, to give them their rights? So far, no. Is this a sensitive issue? Obviously. Are we going to deal with it in the near future? I don't think so. Why? Probably this is where we have the question of affirmative action. What will be the social trajectory? Well, this is the dream of President Joko Widodo, which I don't think should be his personally. If we would like to enforce the law as what the law has been written and agreed, promulgated, then we may have a better future as a nation. We are not going to be a hypocrite having human rights only for the sake of having human rights, but never enforce human rights or make it more personal or domestic. We have constitutional rights, but somehow in many cases it has been denied to a certain group of Indonesians. So if we continue with the current practices, this is just like the Smurf picture on the right side of your monitor. We're going to be hit hard by a lot of issues, a lot of problems at the grassroots. So I started my presentation saying that I am a lawyer. So what's the issue? The issue is the state of Indonesia shall be a state based on the rule of law. So just simply enforce the law. It is a rule of law. We have this banyan tree or pohon beringin as the logo of our Ministry of Law of Human Rights. It used to be the goddess of justice, Themis. Why we changed the logo? Well, because the function of the law should, like a pengayoman, it should give all the weary a place to complain. If you are having a very hot day and you're tired, where are you going? You're going to the shades. That's supposedly the function of the law. If your rights have been violated, you're supposed to complain. You're supposed to file a petition. You're supposed to report to the authority. My rights have been violated, whether it is constitutional rights or whether it is human rights. And something needs to be done. Unfortunately, in quite a lot of important cases, we haven't seen that kind of function as idolized in our logo. So what can you do? Ha, voila. Almost everything that is great has been done by youth. Are you going to keep the trajectory as right now, or are you going to make a difference? Now, let me remind you about Indonesia. It's not because I'm Indonesia, because I have been around and I have been seeing how other countries have been building their nationhood. But look at this. This is a statement from Clifford Geertz. Even though it is written in 1972, it should also be accurate as of today. One of the things that everyone knows, but no one can quite think how to demonstrate, is that a country's politics reflect the design of its culture. At one level, the proposition is indebatable. Where else could French politics exist but French? Yet merely to state it is to raise doubts. Since 1945, Indonesia has seen revolution, parliamentary democracy, civil war, presidential autocracy, mass murder, and military rule. If we include all the way until 1998 and today, political identity, Asian monetary crisis, May 1998 riots, COVID-19. Where is the design on that this nation has not been crumbled or balkanized? You look into the rest of the world, see whether they have the same kind of complexity of the people, of the background, and a huge territory like Indonesia. Could that country maintain their existence? So, the larger archipelago, but not a federal state, the largest Muslim population, but not Islamic country, multi-ethnic country, but not dominated by any ethnic majority. So the question is, quo vadis? I don't think we need any more affirmative action. What we need is the commitment, the political will to just enforce the law. With that, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much, Pak Yuan, for the presentation. It is very enlightening for us. And just a bit of conclusion from Pak Yuan's presentation. The first one is that Pak Yuan also emphasizes that our constitution have been very well equipped, even compared to other states, other countries, including by the incorporation of a set of human rights. Pak Yuan also explained about the policies by the colonial government, such as by grouping people in Indonesia at that time in different levels, the European, foreign, oriental, and native, as well as the law, the IS, that was implemented in the colonial time and period, and as well as the attempt of our previous founding fathers as well as youth back then through Youth Congress to bind all of the ethnic groups in Indonesia. And also Payun also mentioned about a problem of nationhood because Indonesia is still young, as mentioned. We were just being established in 1945, but before that, there are so many multiple ethnic groups that have been here since a long time ago. And Indonesia does have multi-ethnic issues, but it is not yet resolved because of the dishonest and lack of clarity on what happened in the history. For example, the 1965 and 1988 riots. And it hampers the progress to move forward. And as Pak Yoon has concluded at the end of his presentation, Indonesia does not need any more affirmative action, but only the political will to enforce the law. As mentioned, that our constitution has also reaffirmed that we do have human rights and that it has been very well equipped, as well as other laws on abolishment of racial ethnic discrimination. Thank you so much, Pak Yoon. We're going to move forward to our last speaker, Dr. Huok Aun Lee. You may have the floor.
Thank you, Dominique. Selamat sejahtera. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much to FPCI for this very kind invitation. And I must say also, I'm really encouraged and very impressed. This group that's gathering of students, you're so intellectually engaged on an important topic, a difficult one, for a long chunk of Saturday afternoon. So it's really a privilege for me to share here. And also just to give a warning of very heavy material to follow. But you're young, and I'm sure you're up to it, up for the challenge. So Malaysia, as Dr. Yuyun had earlier mentioned, is one of the outstanding cases. It's also a very massive program. And so there's really there's a lot to get through. And I felt that the best way was just to walk through, a whole set of issues. But I think trying to address the question about, is it effective? And what are the other associated issues, and how can it, in what ways can it be implemented in a way that is more effective, as well as applying some constraints and limitations. And so I will address why, how, and so what. And I will unpack a bit further the background in Malaysia, as well as some of the conceptual issues. And the overall thrust is coming from a context in which it is very embedded. It is constitutionally authorized, as mentioned earlier. So I think for the question that is for Malaysia, especially, is not so much should it be done, but given that it already is so much, embedded and quite entrenched, how to make it more productive, how to ideally also make it temporary, and deal with the contentious issues about the majority, the beneficiaries, and the non-beneficiaries. Address about some of the drill down into the policy specifics, the framework, and the particular programs, and a little bit on the outcomes. I think that would help to also reinforce what I'm saying. And then, so what, right? The outcomes, or that's where I think I'll talk more about the outcomes, and then some issues of implementation for other countries. So, yeah, just a little snapshot of Bangsa Malaysia, how it fits in with a country that is diverse and is striving for cohesion, and affirmative action policies, strive to play a role in that. And from now on, it's all heavy text, so enjoy the pictures while it lasts. All right, now we dive in. I think to get a flavor, there is no definitive meaning. There is not a textbook and canonical definition. But here are some a flavoring. I won't read through all of them, but I think if you can catch with these keywords, the bolden words, some of the standout features of affirmative action. Preferential treatment is one aspect that appears in some of the definitions. It's addressing representation, but also in particular areas. And you can see that if you follow, I think you can see my cursor, positions that are regarded with esteem. So it's about higher education, professional positions, management, owning, right, and operating enterprises. Okay. The ILO place some emphasis on that it should be temporary as well. I think that is an underlying principle. We see in another one that is specified is education, employment, and business contracting. And the targeting is based on a population group. This may not really be, I mean, some of what I'm saying is arising from the debates that are happening in Malaysia as well as in South Africa, right? But I think to some extent there will be also, these debates in Indonesia about whether the targeting should be based on ethnicity or identity, or whether it should be based on socioeconomic disadvantage. But my position and the majority of the literature, this approaches it in identifying the beneficiaries in terms of a population group, whether it's race, ethnicity, or gender. So it's not so much identifying based on the poor, but based on a population group, because it's about facilitating a group, right? Their participation, their visibility, which is has an effect on the group's overall position in society. The new economic policy is something that we'll touch on a little bit more. And then just another flavor from the Constitution of South Africa, where it does talk about, it lays out a basis for affirmative action for persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination, right? So contextualizing that to Malaysia, drawing on, this book actually is just out. So indulge me to plug my the book just out on Malaysia and South Africa. And I think what I think needs to be stressed about these two countries' affirmative action, they are majority favoring. And so the preferential element is important to be part of the definition. Because it's preferential, it needs to be done in a way that is more moderated and vigilant. It's addressing representation of disadvantaged groups in higher education, high-level occupations, enterprise, and ownership. So it is a group that are benefiting, that are politically dominant, but are economically disadvantaged. They are a majority group, right? So because of this whole convergence of different factors, you have the constitution, you have a political imperative, a demographic majority, the socioeconomic disadvantages. The imperative is very strong to do affirmative action. At the same time, for the same reasons, the pitfalls and the challenges are also very great. So I will refer to, and I'm not going to delve into the, it can be controversial, these labels, but they are operative. And so to clarify, there's Bumaputra, which is about 2/3 of Malaysia's population, just over 2/3, and that can be broken down into Malay, which is about 55%, mostly on Peninsula, and the non-Malay Bumaputra, mostly in Sabah, Sarawak, Borneo Island, right? And Chinese about 24%, Indian 7%. So get the flavor of the demographics. Now, what affirmative action is and is not. I think there's a complementarity here in that I'm bringing more of a public policy, trained as an economist, but more of an interdisciplinarian in social science and in public policy approach to this problem of affirmative action. To reiterate, it's a problem of a group's underrepresentation in higher education, in those positions that are at the upper echelons, because if a group is absent there, it has an effect on the group's esteem as a whole. And also there are barriers to entry there, and it could be due to discrimination, it could be due to disadvantage. But because you need grades for university entry, all right, and a degree to enter professional occupation, the work experience to be management, right? These are structural barriers to for a group to really have the upward mobility. Now that point is important to address. Firstly, that these are not addressing issues of poverty. Now, poor people can access that, right? But that's not the principal problem, and also because of those barriers to entry and that problem that's being addressed, the instrument, right? The key feature of the policy instrument is preferential treatment. So I just want to walk through us a bit more systematically through it, that why there is the preferential, addressing these problems call for this element of preferential treatment based on identity, based on race or ethnicity or gender, and not primarily based on class. Now, prohibiting discrimination, the legal guarantees, for or prohibitions of unfair treatment and safeguarding equal opportunity, I would argue are not enough. Now, because it's not just affirmative action is a national project that has political imperative. And so it's not just about people eventually moving up, right? Groups, eventually maybe, having opportunity, but facilitating and accelerating that change. So if a society feels that has determined that these processes need to be facilitated and accelerated, then therefore some element of preferential treatment is warranted. And cannot, that situation, we cannot rely on only guaranteeing equal opportunity and prohibiting discrimination. Affirmative action emerged in the US as well after a period of the Civil Rights Act and legally guaranteeing equal opportunity, but the blacks were not advancing as much as was politically and socially desirable, right? So it is very complex and it's controversial because there involves preferential treatment, and in principle, ideally, it should be temporary, not permanent. That is a dilemma, and that is the huge challenge, but it must be stated there as well. There are other pitfalls like the dependency, patronage, corruption, okay? And they need to be also looked at critically. But the ultimate objective remains that of developing Bumaputra, the black there is in the case of South Africa, the capability, competitiveness, and confidence, right? Because this is really ultimately what is necessary for affirmative action to achieve its ultimate goals, in which the group that is benefiting can graduate out of needing the preferential treatment. So there are all these problems along the way should not detract from the attention to the ultimate objective of developing capability, competitiveness. So the questions do arise. This is the debate, I'm sure in Indonesia to some extent, certainly very lively in Malaysia. What about the poor? The poor have needs. And what about meritocracy? I will unpack this a little bit more later, but I just make the point here that they are interrelated, right? But in a support role more. That is, need-based selection, we're giving preference for the poor, giving more of the opportunity to the disadvantaged Bumiputras, and merit-based selection, which is selecting those who are more based on ability and potential, can reinforce, but it's not a replacement. Okay, you cannot just say let's help the poor and then to achieve the goal of the upward mobility of a group that is underrepresented in those areas of higher education, high-level occupations, and so on. And it must be a sector-specific approach. I want to briefly unpack the controversies. And I just draw out three of them. So one that does arise related to the dependency on preferential treatment. There's definitely a lot more that can be said, but I think I want to my overall presentation is geared towards how policy can be better implemented. And I think on this point, it really enforces the imperative that the policy needs to address developing capability, competitiveness, and confidence. At the same time, it's not the only issue it's not the only controversial issue related to preference and privilege, because privilege exists in other forms as well, right? Where you have private schooling, family connections. So we also need to put it in the context and that there's other structures that privilege some groups over others. And then there is the problem that it can stigmatize beneficiaries, because then they're not valued for their own abilities. They might be viewed as, oh, you only got achieve because of the special treatment. That is definitely, possible, and I think that's definitely a reality to some extent. But at the same time, we also need to recognize that stigma can also emerge and arise if there was no affirmative action, because if the group was continually not being upwardly mobile, then stigmas could also arise or could persist. Number two, the distribution of benefits within the group. So there is a popular view, especially in Malaysia, that it's the elites that benefit and not the masses. Now, this needs to be recognized as a possibility in some of the areas of affirmative action. But in Malaysia's case, especially where it's very wide, affirmative action, takes many forms, and some can increase inequality, but there are some that also can reduce inequality. There are some where the benefits can accrue to an elite, and that could be a very negative thing, but it could be just a very necessary thing, because you're distributing contracts, and by definition a few people get those contracts. But it can also be interventions that are growing the middle class, so that's reducing inequality. So it's not something to be treated too simplistically as, oh, it only benefits the elites. The exclusion of non-beneficiaries, it is definitely a reality and unavoidable to some extent, because we're talking about limited opportunities, right? Higher education, is different from primary, where it's universal. But higher education, there's scarce opportunities. So that's something that will need to be managed, and need to have some mitigating measures or moderation to take into account the non-beneficiaries' perspective as well. On the issue of, now that has some effect on social cohesion, the sense of inclusion and exclusion. So I think another important point about the context as well is that a lot of blame often gets placed on affirmative action, and some of it is warranted, but sometimes a little bit maybe unwarranted in that there's so many other factors that are involved here, and other ways that groups that contribute to the sense of inclusion and exclusion, your multicultural policy, political representation, schooling, and so on. Okay, so yeah, again, just to put it in a broader context. So arising from that, I think some of the principles for applying affirmative action, it should focus on programs that are building capability. It's promoting intergenerational upward mobility. So as much as possible, if the disadvantaged can be targeted, that there's a good case morally and in principle to do that where it is possible. You seek ways for graduation out of preferential treatment. That is highly desirable, and providing some safeguards for the non-beneficiary groups. So how it emerged in Malaysia, as we said, is in the constitution, which since 1957, right, the Merdeka Constitution for Malaya, and it was implemented to some extent, but in a more limited capacity. But pressures grew for more proactive measures from the 1960s. There was the Bumaputra Economic Congress in 1965. It gave birth to Bank Bumaputra and so on. May 13, 1969, this conference announcement, some of this was also mentioned. So I think you're somewhat aware that that was a pivotal time in Malaysia. The race riots, there was emergency, and Malaysia was reconfigured in so many ways, politically as well as in the policy. So the new economic policy was introduced in 1971. It transformed Malaysia very comprehensively. And to get a sense of what it was like in 1970, the disparities in these particular areas that affirmative action is targeting. In tertiary education, the proportion of Malays in the only university then was not really very low, but if you look in some of the disciplines like science, medicine, and engineering, right? Really astonishingly few number of Malays enrolled in those programs. So these are the specific empirical documentation, right? The evidence of the inequalities, that I think gave grounds for taking more concerted effort in higher education. In equity ownership, there was very high foreign ownership that needs to be pointed out as well, but also the Malay ownership was very low overall, and in the key sector of mining, so 0.7% of equity of shares in mining companies were Malay-owned, 72%, foreign-owned, 17%, Chinese-owned. Now, this new economic policy in 1971, transformed Malaysia, and it laid out two prongs to eradicate poverty irrespective of race, and a second prong, which is the one that can be equated with affirmative action, social restructuring to reduce and eventually eliminate the identification of race with economic function. And I think I have unpacked this a little. I've already mentioned enough of this earlier, that policies that are promoting the, alleviating poverty, they play a support role, right, towards affirmative action, but they cannot be substitutes one for the other. And I'm happy to address that a bit more later, but I think I do want to move on in the interest of time. And I think to see how maybe this one comes, this is more helpful at this point, and I won't go into the details, okay? But I'm sure you have an impression that the programs in Malaysia are very extensive. This confirms it, and this gives a general sense of how vast it is. Where in higher education there are preferential entry into university, pre-university programs for technical and vocational, preference in public sector, in government and companies, and not all of it is very clear, is black and white, is stipulated in the policy. It's sort of just a practice, right? But you can see that if it's authorized by the Constitution, the grounds for it can be very solid. In enterprise development, in public procurement, right, and also in wealth ownership, in unit trust. And so one of the debates that has arisen, is where does Malaysia go from here, and also why, instead of targeting by race, why not target based on need and the poor? And so one of the ways I find to how to fit this all together, right, is to see how targeting based on disadvantage or based on giving more preference to those from poor backgrounds can fit into affirmative action to reinforce it, in some ways maybe to replace it, but mainly to complement affirmative action. It can apply very more significantly in higher education, and higher education I think also should be a priority of affirmative action, because it is fundamentally about learning. It is about acquiring knowledge and skills. It is the policy sector where the intergenerational mobility also has the greatest scope, where you can target, because you're targeting youth, right? And so you can target the youth of disadvantage to do better, hopefully, than their parents, to move up from one generation to the next. The problem also of rent seeking or profiteering in some of the other fields, like in wealth ownership, where Malaysia has the redistributed and has been the more problematic one in terms of corruption, in terms of those abuses. In higher education, right? It's it is largely precluded, because what can you do? You have a degree. You cannot sell off a degree, right, to make a quick profit in the way that you can sell off shares that were given to you cheaply. Okay, so it can work very more effectively, in higher education, where you also can target the poor and facilitate intergenerational mobility. In some of the others, the emphasis needs to be on selecting those who have the capability and monitoring them, that they are delivering on these opportunities that are given to them, whether it's in contracting, especially in those kind of interventions. And you can set limits as well, like you get it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and then that's it. All right. So to unpack again, I think the overarching theme of affirmative action in Malaysia. We're moving on now towards the latter part about so what. We've talked about how it's done, why it's done, and I think part of it is also looking at Malaysia's experience of what it has achieved. The overarching theme, I think, is that Malaysia has achieved a lot in terms of promoting access, in terms of the quantitative outcomes of increasing enrollment, employment in the public sector, in the government-linked companies. But the overall shortage is in terms of building that capability, building the confidence So in terms of, you could say, quantitative achievements, but qualitatively still falling short. And so it's difficult to make the transition to try and roll back the preference, because the Malays and Bumaputras are not really in the position that they feel very confident about doing that. And so you can see in the labor force, in fact, the Bumaputra share that have tertiary education is highest of all. And you see the Malays higher. So one issue is the Malay and non-Malay Bumaputra disparity, but still the general trend and the achievements show the Bumaputra attainment in education, as far as getting the certifications, is very impressive. But the issues of quality, right, need to be also a part of the picture, where you have more problems of unemployment, depending on the public sector, and just generally the capability, the training has not been quite on par. When we look at the higher level occupations, so we're starting in 1970, the start of the NEP, it shows, right, a track record of what it was meant to achieve to increase the share in professional and management positions, and that is can be, and it is shown very, very clearly what has been achieved. Among managers, it's still there's still a shortfall, right? So that is an acute area that has fallen short. And also, not in this data, but we know that the dependence on the public sector and the government companies, is still quite significant. In enterprise development, so Malaysia has a very big presence, the government, public ownership in large corporations, publicly listed one. And up to now, where there's almost equal number of Malays and Chinese in the directorships of the largest listed corporations in Malaysia. So this is testament to the importance of the government companies. And you also have a lot of retired civil servants being appointed to these boards. But they're it's an older guard, right? The transition to the younger guard, is a bigger question. And when it comes to participation in the broader economy, in the private sector, especially in the SMEs, the Bumaputra owned are still predominantly micro, to a greater extent compared to non-Bumaputra. So, with only 1% at a medium scale, whereas for non-Bumaputra small and medium scale enterprises, 4.3% of them have attained medium scale. And in public procurement, many of them still are small. So again, achievement in access, in participation, but in terms of capability, the fallen short. And then other important element of affirmative action is how the public views it. And here we can draw on some surveys, which show, quite expectedly. So you look at the first one, on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of level of comfort with Malays receiving special privileges. Malay respondents in the survey, it was nationally representative, said they expressed 4 out of 5. They're very comfortable with it, right? They're quite happy with the system. For Chinese and Indian respondents, it's about 2 out of 5. The second one we look at, a vast majority agree that the Malays need the help they can get. So NEP should be welcome. And still a very substantial majority agree that as original inhabitants of this country, Malays, Bumaputra should be accorded special rights and privileges. So it's really supported, and for many reasons. Yes, of course, there's politics, there's a bit of the dogma and indoctrination, but many also do receive the opportunity, as we saw how vast it is, and it reaches ordinary people in very significant ways. So it is showing that it has reached them in terms of providing opportunity and access, but still lacking in empowerment, because they have not really been given or have not been cultivated sufficiently the capability and competitiveness. Minorities are wary, right? And that is something as well that should be taken note of, that we can discuss later, but I think I will just move on, and probably this is the last. So what are some of the implications? It's not so much a yes and no, and I guess I'm learning so much. Thank you so much about Indonesia. the specifics about what is in place, for women, for particular regions. I think it's just a few ideas, right? More along the lines, not so much of to do it or not, but I think how it should be done, how it can be done better. Firstly, the beneficial, the focus on capability and competitiveness, that should drive it, right? Promoting access is one, but at the same time, also it's about developing the capability, which ultimately for the beneficiaries then to be able to be more self-reliant. It needs to be, I think, addressed in a sector-specific way. So how it's applied in higher education is different from employment. And I think that's really something to consider. Again, in higher education, you can try to address the upward mobility intergenerationally, much more than you can in areas like contracting or employment. And maybe I can highlight for the enterprise development. That's the one that, the need for promoting, you provide opportunity, but also increasing that dynamism, competitiveness, and upscaling. Right? And that's where limits can be applied in terms of how many times per person gets the preferential treatment. Wealth ownership, probably not so applicable, but if it does arise, it's the one that needs to be approached with the most caution because of the tendencies, the risks that it can be undermined by patronage, by corruption, by profiteering. So caution and restraint, but it's a long-term solution, right? Some kind of wealth transfers also, warrant some consideration, because wealth, right, is a major factor in inequality across a generation. So it has some importance, but it has to be approached, I think, with a lot of caution. And I think maybe to skip back right to the beginning, the issues about the disparities within the beneficiary group. I think, again, to emphasize that the possibilities for distributing the benefits within the designated group, where as much as possible, if you can go to more disadvantaged within the group. So, let's say if it's for women, right? Not just women in general, but if you can target more disadvantaged women, that you stand to gain even more for society if you do that. So within the beneficiary group, target the disadvantaged a bit more. So I know there's an overload there. But I really welcome questions. This probably has prompted quite a bit that we can discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. It is a very insightful experience, and presentation for us, especially on Malaysia. Probably some of us did not know that much about the affirmative action in Malaysia. So before moving on to the question and answer session, for the participants, I will conclude what Dr. Lee has also explained in the presentation. Beginning with the many definitions of affirmative actions, with emphasis on how the underrepresented represented groups are appointed also in upper positions, as well as the ethnic composition and demographics in Malaysia. And it is also emphasized quite repetitiously about how the programs for poverty alleviation should be the supporting programs instead of the main program, so that the principal problem is not poverty, and that facilitating progress and overcoming barriers calls for preferential treatment primarily based on identity or race, not class or low income or socioeconomic disadvantage. And also, Dr. Lee also explained about how important it is not only to increase access by the affirmative action, but also how to develop the capability, and also how to promote the intergenerational mobility, one of which is through the policy on affirmative action in higher education. And that is such also a very insightful presentation, Doctor. Thank you so much. And we're going to move forward to the question and answer session. And the mechanism will be that participants should write their questions in the chat box with the format of name, institution, and then your question. And then as the moderator, I will then pick the most relevant question. And at the end, there will be a best participant award at the end of the session, which will be determined based on the quality of the question. So without further ado, I will invite all the participants to also put their questions in the chat box. And okay, there is one question from Anggito in the chat box from Universitas Pajajaran to Her Excellency Yuyun, to Ibu Yuyun. I will read the question. Many policies are designed to tackle inequalities, either on political aspect or business aspect. But the problems of gender inequality still exist until this day. From gender equality, inequality in entrepreneurship, business, law, etc. How the question is, how can we change the perspective from the human being, from the public, about the equality in human rights and business rights, and I think all nations can create as many laws as they want, but how do we change public perspective about women's rights? So Ibu Yuyun, you can answer the question directly while we're waiting for other questions from the participants to other panelists.
Thank you very much. Angga, is it Angga?
It's
Sorry.
It's Anggito.
Anggito, yeah. Thank you very much for the question, Anggito. Yes, you are right that this problem of gender inequality still our homework. As far as I remember, it has been the priority of many governments. But as you also realize that the problem of gender inequality is rooted in different factors and different sources. One of them is on cultural and belief. So this is something that many governments try to tackle, many civil society also try to tackle, scholars also try to address the problem by having a lot of public education to general public on the importance of having gender equality. And as far as I remember, the responses from public as to resist this kind of concept of gender equality quite different from time to time. So for instance, lately I continue to hear in the last 5 years that why prioritize women, why it is not important for us. So it always gender equal to women. Actually, gender is on to equalize between women and men. So both genders can contribute to the society well. So, but the emphasis or the quantity of approaches and quantity of programs mainly addressing to women as the most marginalized group in society, one of the most marginalized group in society, create a lot of tension, jealousies from other groups. But this is the important, again, this is the importance of public education. Should be properly convey the message that it is not about competition between men and women. It is about providing equal opportunity, equal access for both women and men to do whatever they want, to reach whatever they want. Like they want to go to highest education, it's fine, regardless your gender. So you mentioned about the access to business. In ASEAN, there are a number of initiatives to improve and increase the number, the quantity and quality of women entrepreneurship. So there is ASEAN Committee on Women has a project of AWEN, ASEAN Women Entrepreneurship Network. So they create a space in which women can come in Southeast Asia, can come together, can build the capacity, and then to establish network, because in business you need network. So they come up with the exhibition from one country to another. They also exchange some of the product and learn from the product. So at the ASEAN level, there has been number of efforts to improve this kind of enlarging the space for women to contribute to society through business. At the moment, so this is there is a conflicting data. So we understand that many women actually are in small SMEs, but the data coming from ASEAN Secretariat just 2-3 months ago, basically men are mostly in the SMEs in Southeast Asia. So I'm not sure which one is correct, but World Bank, the data from World Bank or UN Regional Asia Pacific always come up with the statement that women are more in SMEs. But yeah, I don't know which one, but if it is so, it might be, so this kind of programs to open up more opportunities for women seems like successful. But of course, we should continue to educate the public on the importance of gender equality and non-discrimination.
Thank you so much, Ibu Yun. I hope it answers Anggito's question. Another question will be for Pak Yuun from Nadine Sherani from Universitas Brawijaya. She asked about the honesty from what you mentioned in the presentation. And she asked that, okay, how do we measure honesty or a really good intention from the politician, since all this time what we heard are just either sugarcoating, etc.? Should we check from the background of the actor who proposed or implemented the affirmative action, or should we just go with the flow? And what are your thoughts for this? So Pak Yuun, you can directly answer the question.
Well, honesty needs transparency, that's for sure. Well, if it is possible to have a background check on a politician who raised the issue of honesty in light of affirmative action, it's good if it is possible. But I, as a lawyer, honesty only can be done if you talk about the facts. So you need to reveal all the facts, the relevant facts, and to get rid of the irrelevancies. Unfortunately, until today, we don't really uh, finish with all the fact findings on all the riots took place in 1998 or what really happened in 1965 and 1966. Even though we have fact-finding team, but the result, I think, do correct me if I'm wrong, never been revealed to the public. So how can you talk about repairing the past to have a better future? So as a lawyer, I would say facts, facts, and facts. Let's talk about the facts, and then we talk about what's best to overcome the problem. That's my thought.
Thank you so much, Pak Yuun. I hope that answers Nadine's question. And another question will be for Dr. Lee from one of the committees from Admin. The question is, how would you view the reality of Chinese communities in Malaysia, considering that there seems to be deadlock between the Chinese and Malay, with the refusal of the former to assimilate into larger Malaysian culture, while the latter used this reason to uphold this discriminatory policy? As a matter of fact, both phrases seem to use this policy as a reason to foster ethnocentrism by creating schools with each of ethnic language and using this topic politically, especially when it is near to the general election. So Dr. Lee, you may answer the question.
Okay, we're starting with the easy questions. Thank you. That's a very deep observation and a very pressing question. You know, it cuts to, I think, the one of the core dilemmas, right, and the issues that we're continuously grappling with. I mean, I would say firstly that, you know, Malaysia, you know, is a product of particular history and a certain model of national integration, cohesion, however you want to put it. You know, that I think you may be familiar, and I think in generally it does capture, right, this contrast of integration and assimilation. So Malaysia, not the assimilation model in which, you know, the minority groups or whichever groups that, you know, majority or minority, that sort of converge more culturally and linguistically. So Malaysia, it can be a strength in that the diversity and culture and ethnicity and language are more preserved, but at the same time, you know, it also can be a source of more fractures. So I think it's always a tension. It's described, you know, stable tension, and a model of social cohesion. So not unity in the sense that there is uniformity or, you know, that conformity, but cultures that are a lot more distinct, but integrated. You can find signs of both, right? That that the younger Malaysians, and I think surveys are also showing this, their outlook is a bit, you know, not as, don't see so much through the ethnic lens as older Malaysians, especially when they're more urbanized and grow up in an environment that is a bit more mixed. But religion can become increasingly a source of difference and distance between people. Now, we got to the schools. I think that was a particular aspect of it. Again, I think this is a source of distinctiveness for Malaysia, that, you know, there are these Chinese schools and the vast majority of Malaysian Chinese attend the Chinese schools for various reasons, including the quality of the schooling, you know, mathematics and science, so subjects that are not related to language or culture, but also for Chinese language. Just recently this week, it was revealed that a lot of non-Chinese, the enrollment is higher, right? So there is the issue that is polarizing and it can be politicized, but at the same time, people are also making decisions, real people, parents, to put their non-Chinese, including Malays, in Chinese schools. And so the schools can be also places of integration. I know I'm not giving a very, you know, very definite answer of it, but I think the Chinese have accommodated to a large extent. At the same time, yes, the issues are still very, very real when it comes to higher education, the lesser opportunity. And Malaysia's one pragmatic approach has been to offer, expand the scope of private higher education. So it's 50-50 now, 50% public, 50% private, which does relieve some of that pressure, because the Chinese, especially not getting into the public universities, they have to spend more for private, but at least it is an option, right? And that was part of the strategy for that. But we'll still have to keep negotiating, and that's why I think for Malaysia moving forward, they need to still address, you know, public institutions having more equitable representation is a goal, and that includes, you know, more participation of the non-Malays in the public universities. But in order to get that, they need to make the Malays, the Bumiputras, you know, more confident, enhance their academic achievements, so that they really can, you know, be not fear so much if there's going to be any rollback of preferential treatment.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for the answer. And there is also, we still have plenty of time, so I will also read another question for Pak Yuun from Rishad from Universitas Indonesia. He said that he agrees that there's multi-ethnic problem in Indonesia, but he thinks that the core of the problem is not in the ethnic groups itself, but on the religions that the ethnics are largely identified or stereotyped with. As a majority, Islam has a de facto advantage on the society, especially after the resurgence of Islamism in 1990s to 2000. And the question will be how the government could remedy the relations between the religions that become the core of multi-ethnic problems within the single concept of Indonesian people, considering that religion could be a more powerful force than state law. For Pak Yuun, you can directly answer the question.
I think what we need to understand that Indonesia has a multi-layer human rights problems, if we want to use the term human rights. First of all, between the so-called native versus the non-native, whatever that native means, usually addressed to the Chinese. The Arabs, Indonesian do not have that problem because of, you're correct, religion is considered as something that will bind the native and the non-native, in this case, the Arabs. But there's also an issue about religion, Muslim versus the rest. Now, what we need to understand in Kalimantan, for instance, back in 1998, 1997, we do have an ethnic problem between the Dayaks and the Madura. So it's very, very scary. I watch a report where a 3-year or 4-year-old boy holding a head like this after beheaded. And then they play like it's a soccer ball. That's what happened in Indonesia. That's between the Dayak and the Madura. But recently, yes, it's about religion between the so-called Muslim majority versus the minority. Now, what can the government do? If we would like to have a better future, first of all, let's settle everything according to the law. What does the law says? That should be the rule of the game, the rule of nationhood, the rule of the state. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure from, you can call it pressure group, but I can see, but you may also consider it as thugs or preman, that to make sure that, we are above the law doesn't apply to us. You cannot do that in a society like as complex as Indonesia. You cannot do that. You need to be able to address everything according to the law. Now, this is something that has been missing in the last decade. You may have encountered the word musyawarah mufakat, deliberation for consensus, and there's a lot of been mocking about that because in the Suharto eras, it was very much used by Suharto to outsmart everyone to make sure that he will be repeatedly elected as the president. That's the genius of Suharto. Now, what we need to understand that musyawarah mufakat that has been said as something that indigenous for Indonesian society is actually very good. The basis of musyawarah mufakat is the one that we have been ignoring so many decades, 4 generations, because the emphasis was only on the result that everybody should be happy. And we all know nobody's going to be happy for every single situation. One person, one individual, or a group of individuals may not be happy with the decision. Now, what we need to go back is to understand when we talk about musyawarah untuk mufakat, the basis for that is a recognition that you and I are different. It is individualisms, but we need to talk, we need to agree. So that's the teamwork. We need to agree on something so that we can move forward. Now, unfortunately, because the emphasis had been all this time on the result instead of recognition that I, as an individual, is a different person. I have a different background. I have a different interests and objectives, and the rest of you will have the same kind of situation. We mock the musyawarah mufakat. So if the government needs to do something for real, open up a public discussion. You can do it. You can do a public dialogue, open up fora for discussions, and on the same on the same time, if there is a violation of rights, either constitutional or human rights, let the court settle it. Then we can learn. It may not be perfect. Maybe the decision will be still controversial, but let's pick up from that. A civilization can only move forward if you want to learn from the past, and you need to be honest with that. So that's what the government can do. And this kind of forum is very good, excellent, because you are the future. You are the future. I am the present, but you are the future.
Thank you so much, Payun, for the answer. The next question will be to Ibu Yuyun from Selina. And the question is, how can the practice of affirmative action policy guarantee the qualities of the minority groups of people who become the representative in a certain field, for example, in the politics or in the government? How far can we know that the representative could bring justice and interest to their supporters? Because maybe in Indonesia, we still cannot see the representatives really fight for their group, or sometimes it's just not enough. Thank you. So Ibu Yuyun, you can directly answer the question.
Thank you very much, Selina. I think that's a very good point that need to be added into the assessment to what extent the affirmative action has been effective in the last couple of years. Because my observation, affirmative action policies and programs in Indonesia mainly focus on number, increasing number of women, increasing number of indigenous people, increasing number of different groups into certain places. The quality of it, that's something that need to be addressed. I think I would like to support also what Dr. Lee mentioned earlier on the quality, empowerment, capability. That's something that if affirmative action need to be continued in Indonesia or any else in different countries, so focus more on quality, not quantity only. I don't have the data or statistic, but I can see number of the number of women increase in parliament. So I used the example of the quota of women in the parliament. The earlier years of implementing the affirmative action, we come up with very good individual women sitting in the parliament, but coming to these years, we continue to see the decrease of the number or the increase of quality. So there is a intervention from political party into the decision who should be nominated as the candidates, not based on the quality, but maybe based on the materials that owned by the individual. I think Burhan Muhtadi mentioned about the money politics in Indonesian election so far, in money politics in the general politics of Indonesia. So the answer is I don't know how to evaluate, but if affirmative action is seen as one of the development policy that governments want to continue, then the priority, the focus should be like what you suggested, the quality of the individual that we want to promote as part of the affirmative action programs.
Thank you, Ibu Yuyun, for the answer. I will probably also extend the question to Dr. Lee, since you've also mentioned that the definition of affirmative actions also include the inclusion, the access of the underrepresented groups into the high-level positions, for example. And do you have any thoughts on how these, for example, high-level politicians or stakeholders from the underrepresented groups can actually fulfill the interest and promote the equality of rights for their groups itself? So probably, Dr. Lee, you have thoughts on this as well?
Malaysia, another interesting thing about Malaysia is that for all its very, very vast affirmative action in the socioeconomic sphere, it's conspicuously absent politically. I mean, I think firstly because there is a quite obvious factor there in that the Malays are the demographic majority and politically dominant and the beneficiaries of affirmative action. So they don't really need any policy to ensure that they are politically represented. I think in the political sphere, I mean, Malaysia has had certain political structures, how parties are constituted. So it's a parliamentary system, first past the post, not proportionate. So, you know, interventions that are trying to promote like women, right? It's a bit more challenging in that kind of a system where you don't have proportional voting. You can only say, okay, even if you try to increase more women candidates, right? If they don't win, there's no other way for voters to express a preference for having more women, because the woman would, you know, and to begin with, I mean, it's not really very embraced. So as far as you know, for women and promoting that, I'm bringing it up because it's been talked about here and also mentioned in Malaysia. I mean, yes, we have Malaysia has a Chief Justice, first time a woman, and quite a few in the highest court, the federal court. Woman Deputy Prime Minister for the first time, albeit just for 2 years, Natrin Sriwan Aziza, and but to get women in parliament is difficult. I think the political will is not really there. It's still very, you know, the boys network and the culture of the parties is still very much male centric, right? You have you know, the mainstream, and then you have women's wings, and you have pemuda. So you say pemuda, right? It's gender neutral, but you have putri, right? You don't have putra, you have only putri, because it's assumed that pemuda is going to be male dominated. But okay, we have made a concession to have, you know, a putri wing. Yeah. I think what Malaysia has shown is that with you know, if there is that follow through on the political declarations, you know, if they can muster the will in the public sector to make that change, then yeah, they can incline, you know, the appointments to, not just because they are, I mean, yes, you want more women or even certain other minority groups, the Orang Asli, which is one really long neglected. These are the group in Peninsula. You know, there is increasing attention to that. Just first having the first member of parliament, and that was, I think, a very deliberate selection and an important step for the community and for women as well in the public sector. You know, if they really want to, they can, right? But there are also certain constraints with Malaysia's electoral system, specifically for electing members of parliament. They would really have to put out many candidates, right? So if you're women against women in a lot more places, yeah, then you're a really good chance that the winner will be, you know, a woman going to parliament. But we have really very top-notch Malaysia, you know, women have really shown very capable in parliament and in cabinet. But it's ups and downs, not like a continuous progress, I have to say. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Lee. We still have around 10 minutes So I will be entertaining probably 1 or 2 questions. There's one question for Pak Yuun from Aulia Rahman from Universitas Brawijaya. Based on your opinion and experiences, why do Indonesian administrators are not good enough to enforce the law? And how is your opinion if some people stated that we need affirmative action, since when the minority get the opportunity, the majority group will feel insecure and they will create social problem like riots or demonstration? How would affirmative action can be used to protect the minority and make them feel secure from the majority? So, Pak Yuun, you can directly answer the question.
Okay, we do have affirmative policy, but we don't have the action yet. So if we consider affirmative action that needs to be materialized in government policy upholding the law, yes, we do have a homework to do. Now, what I guess will be, because the country is so complex, it's so huge, and the challenges are so many. So if the administrative or the government could not properly or professionally handle or operate the country, I would not be surprised, because we still have a lot of things to learn. First of all, we need to be able to give meritocracy a chance. However, if we give meritocracy a chance, then there will be a lot of injustices for a large number of the population. Why? Because still a large number of the population are lag behind in many respects. And then a large number of the population, we can include religion in this case. Most of them will be Islam. It's not a surprise, because majority of Indonesians are Muslims. Some of them will be from the eastern part of Indonesia. It will not be a surprise, because Suharto's policy of development was very centralistic to Java, especially to Jakarta. And then if we also apply meritocracy, there will be lesser chance for people from the eastern part of Indonesia to get higher education, because they simply cannot compete. They can have basic educations, but no tertiary education. So in that case, yes, we do need something to pull up all part of the population that still needs to enjoy the benefit of freedom. Now, so doing meritocracy is a problem. It may become a problem of human rights for a large number of the population. The second explanation, probably because we still a young nation. So you can look at all the political elections that's still going on until today. How are you going to win the competition? You rely pretty much on a lot of primordial issues, whether you share the same ethnicity, whether you share the same religion. Rarely they will share the same alma mater. That will not be the case. So you play the cards that will convenient for you to win the contest. So it's a two-edged sword when we talk about meritocracy, and then primordialism sometimes will be conveniently ready if you need to win a contest. So even though we try to have a good governance from the top to the bottom, but in many respects, you need to be able to speak to the general public that everyone will have the same chance. The problem with Indonesia, and I think in Southeast Asia, we don't have the same level of playing field. The playing field should be level. That's ideal. But the people will not be able to play because we are simply not ready to play the game. Whatever the game will be, whether it is business, whether it is education, whether it is access to justice. from that perspective, you can see that in many countries where you cannot have level of playing field because everyone, not everyone can compete on the same game, you will have a problem with corruption. You will have a problem with collusion and nepotism. So it's pretty much what happened in Indonesia. When I, as a Japanese, I'm not okay, I cannot compete with him or her that comes from different suku, I may be okay because Japanese seems to be the majority. But if you are a Batak, if you are Ambonese, you may rely on primordialism, whether it is ethnicity or whether it is religion. Now, how are we going to move forward? Well, this is like a dialogue that the country needs to settle. You need to recognize, just be honest, we do have a problem. Do we want to attain meritocracy? Yes, there's a lot of things that have been done to that direction. The education is open up for everyone. We can see a lot of affirmative action. This time is affirmative action for Papua. But we don't see that same kind of approach for the entire archipelago. So the government has done quite a lot, but what we need is time and the willingness to learn because we're still young.
Thank you, Pak Yuun. I will move forward to the last question from the participants. There's one question for Dr. Lee from Benedicta, one of the public high school students in Yogyakarta in Indonesia. She asked, how is your thought about how the unprivileged like people in the society, for example, the poor people who cannot access the education system, can understand about the racial differences and the implementation of the affirmative action itself. So I'll give the floor to you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Benedicta, for that question. This is a good moment that I can do. I don't want to register one important note. Maybe if you got the impression that what I'm saying is to not prioritize poverty alleviation or pay attention to the poor, that's not my point at all. It's that these are different policy objectives for helping the poor, and affirmative action, which is more about facilitating the upward mobility. But where they can be interrelated, I think that's the question. So firstly, poverty alleviation and helping the poor, right, is more important, I think, for as a national, a responsible government, democracy, because it's about meeting basic needs. But that is the objective, right? And the instruments are also different. It's through rural development, it's through basic education. The difference between basic education is that it's universal and you do not have any entry requirements. And you just go to the school that is in your neighborhood, right? At least that's the basic that is provided because it's a right. Right? Higher education, there are requirements. So even if you want to help more poor enter university, which is very noble, and I think there's a strong case for that and should be done and can be done, they still have to meet certain academic requirements. You can relax the requirements, but only so much. You cannot just say, all the poor enter university, but you can do that about you can do that about primary, secondary education. So I think it does begin with the system to level it a bit more, the playing field, so that the quality, not just the provision and enrollment, but when the students graduate from secondary into university, that the disparity, right, is reduced, so that those who are from a disadvantaged background are not so disadvantaged in terms of getting into university. But the measures can be done, I think. It does require a bit more targeting, right? A bit more assistance. And I think you try to generate a momentum. You try to draw in more. It's what is being done, right? In Malaysia, with Orang Asli, with some of the indigenous, whether it's with Papua and the Nusa Tenggara and the other islands that are not really represented, because it means a lot to the families, to the communities, when they start to see that the possibility of entering university. But it can start with a few, and you try and grow it from there. Not just then just to say, oh, get into university and then just drop them there. But I think it would need to be supplemented with some support as well, because they will probably struggle a bit more because they come from a disadvantaged background. But I think that kind of intentionality, doing it in a more systematic way, you know, that is targeted and providing the necessary support. I think that's where it can address some of the issues of the underprivileged, because there surely is talent among them. People who have the talent, but their schooling has, you know, been a bit of a handicap, and they can thrive. And as they do, and they can show that example, it will benefit their families, and the community will look to them and say that that's the possibility, and it will, I think, can have that kind of intergenerational, broader, momentum. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee's answer will wrap up our question and answer session due to the limited time. I would like to say thank you so much for the three speakers. I'm sure that all the participants have learned so much from the presentations as well as the answers to the participants' questions. And thank you so much as well for all the participants for the enthusiasm. And I will directly hand over again the session to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you so much once again. I apologize for any mistake or any word that might be insulting for some people, probably. And I hope you have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dominique, for moderating this amazing and insightful discussion. We hope that all the participants can get many fruitful insights and we can gain more knowledge regarding the effectiveness of affirmative action in achieving equality for each ethnic group in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. Next, as what we have mentioned before, we will announce the best participants of FPCI Chapter Summit 2020 Policy Dialogue Affirmative Action. Is it an effective instrument to achieve racial equality? And the best participant goes to... Congratulations, Anggito Abimanyu from UNPAD and Benedicta Nasya from SMA N8 Jogja for being the best participant in this event. Thank you, Anggito and Benedicta, for the great questions and for actively being involved in today's discussion. The best participants will be contacted by the committee for the handover of the certificate. Lastly, for our kind participants, would you like to help other humans? Those people might have the capabilities but do not have the opportunities. They are the refugees. They ran away from their country to save their life. They are stuck in a place that they never wanted to be in. All the places seem so dark for them. Let's give a little amount that we have for helping them suffering to live, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. Our theme this year is Break the Prison for the Refugees. If you have a big heart to help them, please visit the link shown in the slides. You can help until 31st of November 2020. We will distribute the donations to the refugees managed by Sandhya Institute. The outbreak of COVID-19 has been a defining event in the beginning of this decade. The pandemic has revealed itself to be an international issue, with countries around the world scrambling to prevent the worst possible outcome to arrive. One of the biggest issues that all countries face pertains to the degradation of international trade. FPCI Chapter We Diplomatic Afternoon Tea 2020 is an annual event that opens a discussion between the speakers and participants with interesting yet substantive foreign policy and other international issues. This event will be held on Friday, 20th of November 2020. Please expect our notable speakers from immense background, which are as follows. His Excellency Dr. Peter Schuth, Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to the Republic of Indonesia. His Excellency Cameron Mackay, Ambassador of Canada to the Republic of Indonesia. His Excellency Armando G. Alvarez, Ambassador of Mexico to the Republic of Indonesia. And His Excellency Dr. Hilton Fisher, Ambassador of the Republic of South Africa to the Republic of Indonesia. This event will be moderated by Faris Abdurrahman, the most outstanding student of the Faculty of Economics and Business of Universitas Indonesia 2020. We truly hope that through this event, participants will gain a better knowledge of countries' strategic ways in dealing with the upcoming economic recession. All right, so now we will have a photo session which will be documented by the Research and Analysis Division. So please, for all the speakers and participants, to turn your camera on so that we can capture your smile in this precious event. Research and Analysis Division, are you ready? Research and Analysis Division, are you ready? Okay, I'll count down from 3, 2, 1. Once again, please smile. I'll count down from 3, 2, 1. Thank you everyone for the photo session. Thank you for all the speakers, Her Excellency Yun Wahyuningrum, Yoon Opusungu PhD, Dr. Wok Aun Lee, as well as our moderator, Ms. Dominique, and all the participants who have joined the webinar today. Please don't forget to follow our social media on Instagram at FPCI UE. See you in our future event. I'm signing out from this event as the Master of Ceremony. Please accept my sincere apology if I had some mistakes during the event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom. Om Shanti 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 Om. FPCI Chapter UE Board of 2020. Innovate beyond limits.